Welcome to No Apologies on Beck. I am your host, Lori Hins. I am very pleased to welcome today from Washington, D.C., remotely, Doug Kellogg. He's going to talk to us a little bit about income taxes and particularly phasing out income taxes. Doug, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Great to be with you and virtually visiting North Dakota.
Right? Have you been to North Dakota before, Doug?
Yes, I have, but
Excellent.
it was pre-pandemic, so we'll have to get out there again soon.
Yeah, it's the free state of North Dakota, so you would probably enjoy it here, especially compared to D.C., I'm just guessing. So, Doug, let's talk about ATR, Americans for Tax Reform. That is where you work. I would love to know if you could give us a little bit of history about the organization, because it really speaks to those of us in North Dakota who would love to have some tax reform here. So talk about ATR, please.
Sure. Well, Americans for Tax Reform has a lot of history. ATR was founded in 1985 by Grover Norquist, who's still president of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover founded ATR at the request of President Reagan to advocate for tax reform in the 80s. So ATR was instrumental in making sure that the tax reform package that President Reagan was championing and working to get through Congress was a net tax cut. So it was returning hard-earned dollars back into the pockets of American taxpayers. And from that point forward, ATR has continued to advocate for taxpayers. We're well known for sponsoring the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which allows folks who are running for office to make a written public commitment to their constituents that they will oppose all tax increases. So ATR continues to advocate for taxpayers. The Taxpayer Protection Pledge is a project we continue to promote. We have upwards of around 90% of House Republicans in Congress have signed the pledge. Around 1,000, just shy of 1,000 state legislators and state lawmakers across the country have signed the pledge. In addition to that, we advocate for taxpayers and for free market policy that ensures that the country is free and folks have the ability to be entrepreneurs and grow businesses and build families and afford to live in their states, localities, and the country. And so we're generally advocating to keep money in the pockets of families, and that includes North Dakota families.
We love that in North Dakota. In fact, figuratively, we pretty much press our nose up to the glass at the South Dakota border and watch what they're doing down there. And we would love to be able to have some of the opportunities. I know that there is a trend right now all across the country to finally put this on the table and get some of this actual tax reform done, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot going on, and South Dakota is certainly a good example of positive tax policy. But they're a bit ahead of the curve. As you know, you referenced South Dakota, no income tax, and there's a very, very highly competitive, top-rated state business tax climate. So there's some stiff competition right in the backyard for North Dakota. But that's only getting more difficult for states that actually want to compete, for people who are moving out of high tax states. People are looking to start families, businesses that are fleeing high taxes and heavy regulation. That competition is heating up. Last year in 2021, we saw 14 states cut their income taxes across the country, and we have close to 10, and we may get more than that this session, working on tax cuts already. We've had a number of states pass tax cuts this session to follow on what was a landmark year in 2021. So this momentum has been incredibly impressive, and it's really led, I think, by two major things. I mean, one, the example of a state like South Dakota, like Florida, Texas, states where we've seen incredible interstate migration, where states like New York with high taxes, California, Illinois, losing more than 1% of their populations, in a state like Florida and Texas, these are already big states gaining more than 1% of population growth in just a year of the pandemic. So those are huge numbers. I mean, 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but 1% population growth in that short period of time, it shows you that people are voting with their feet and looking for more competitive tax environments. I think state legislators are noticing that. They certainly have additional revenues because the economy hasn't hasn't been as bad as some people feared due to the pandemic hitting. Partial part of that is also federal relief dollars. And so the opportunity has been there for states to cut taxes. And that trend, as I mentioned, 14 states last year, this is led by Republican states. So when we talk about states cutting taxes, love it if it was less of a partisan affair. We want more money in the pockets of taxpayers. But the reality is that Republican-led states, and there are about 22, I think is the number, 22 states have full Republican control of government. And excuse me, I think it's 23, but that number, I think, is fueling this. So we only have 14 states that are completely controlled by Democrats, and we see states with Republican legislative leadership. Indiana recently cut their income tax. We've had a number of states move to eliminate their income taxes. Louisiana, with a Republican legislature passing a bill to eliminate their income tax. Arizona had a big fight, worked very hard last session to pass legislation that would make them have the lowest flat income tax in the nation at 2.5%. And we talk about South Dakota being in your backyard. The pandemic and this work from home situation also makes it more relevant for states to pay attention to competition that's not necessarily a neighbor. North Dakota has a very low flat income tax, but now they'll be superseded by Arizona when they fully implement a 2.5% flat income tax, flattening out a few rates and lowering their tax burden. And those are just some of the examples as the trend continues. So
I think I also think that with states that are doing these different ways they are lowering their taxes, we see that as North Dakotans, and we're like, okay, why can we not do that? And we have, going back, when you said only like 1,000 legislators from across the states have signed the pledge, that seems like a really low number to me after you actually look at how many legislators there are in various states, Doug. That's a very small number.
Well, certainly, it is a significant number in terms of percent of state legislators who have taken a pledge to take taxes off the table. We want that number to be higher, so we'd love to reach a higher bar there. But unfortunately, very, very few Democrat lawmakers sign a pledge committing to not raise your taxes in this day and age. So you're taking a lot of legislators entirely off the table.
That's true.
But when you take that into account, I think the numbers make more sense. But we want more people to make that commitment, and that's something we promote. Is a commitment between candidates, elected officials, and their voters and constituents. I mean, that's what it is. It's just a written promise to them. So they have candidates on the record saying the tax hikes are off the table. And once they're off the table, then we can look more seriously at other government reform rather than just throwing dollars into different priorities. And that's really what we've seen in the more left-leaning states. Some of them have slowed down on increasing taxes during the pandemic. Right. Only one state, New York, increased their taxes, but they're not returning the money to taxpayers. They're finding special interests and their friends to pass those dollars along to them.
And that is our problem here in North Dakota, Doug, is that we may not actually raise taxes, but we spend absolutely everything we have with regard to these amazing revenues, and then we end up never, ever allowing tax relief for some reason. Well, tell me a little bit about when you say you are the state projects director, so you have hands-on in all the different states with regard to what they're doing in each individual, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, ATR has a state team, so Americans for Tax Reform. We have a state team, so I don't have to do the entire country by myself, but
super helpful.
I represent ATR at the state level. We do a lot of things. We wear a lot of different hats, but primarily we're advocating in state legislatures for taxpayer interests, making sure that taxpayers have a representative who's talking about the best policies to keep money in their pockets and return money to hardworking North Dakotans and all Americans at the state level. And the states are where the action is. I mean, we've seen a lot of good progress made on policy as DC hits gridlock, which is often welcome. I mean, we don't mind states taking the lead on policy and shutting down bad ideas in Washington.
That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, that's good. Now, the other thing you have is you have to track, because there are legislation in some states, there's proposed legislation in some states. Some states are going to try to phase out their income tax by the initiated measure route, too. So all different areas and ways of trying to do basically the same thing.
Yeah, and initiated measures, we certainly support income tax elimination either way. And something that's been tried in North Dakota, I think more recently on property taxes.
Right.
So that's a worthwhile path if that's what's required and what works. So
That was my question.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask that question. Is eliminating property tax a gateway, a good gateway? I've heard it said both ways. People say, no, it's a totally different thing. It's not a good way. But is it a good gateway to getting there?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be said is getting taxes down is good. So going after property taxes and reducing property tax burdens, worthwhile goal. It is different, and it is a trickier animal when you're talking about state income taxes. You're talking about the state legislature has control over that. It's a state administered, statewide income tax rate. And local property taxes are a different animal. You're talking about they're local. You have different property tax jurisdictions, different school districts, different local voter pools. So
Sure.
it's a different situation. And we've had a number of times when we've seen states try to tackle property taxes by taking money from state revenues, taxpayer money at the state level, and sending that down to the local level to try to alleviate local property tax pressures. And that's a very dangerous gamble. I mean, you're taking a burden at the local, more local level, and then involving every taxpayer in the state.
Right.
I think the most cautionary tale of that is a state like New Jersey, where they implemented an income tax, and this is many years ago now, but they wanted to help drive down property tax burdens. And then you end up with a state with income tax, sales tax, high property taxes. And even though they have a property tax cap that limits property tax growth, the burdens on every level are high. I mean, they're sky high. They're either the highest, worst burdens in the entire country among states, or they're quite high. So the point there is, be careful how you tackle property tax relief. There's something to be said for local accountability to local voters. And that's why one of the reforms we love is truth in taxation, which is focused on ensuring there's local accountability, and those local voters that are dealing with their local property taxes and their local government are notified and have the opportunity to show up at meetings when tax hikes are being considered, and that there's more of a process. So you don't get a meeting where property tax hikes are quickly approved and nobody was paying attention. We want voters to be engaged, know what's going on. And Utah was a leader on that policy and has proven very effective in keeping their property tax burdens down. And now we've seen states follow that model. Just like we're talking about state income tax cuts, we've had other states adopt truth in taxation, including Nebraska and Kansas. So that's a better starting point for tackling property taxes than having the state take other tax dollars and send them around trying to bribe local governments to then keep taxes low.
No, exactly right. So in North Dakota, we have our June primary on June 14th, and we have all these new up-and-coming legislators. What would you say to citizens with regarding maybe the tax pledge, what they can do to at least encourage the legislators who are coming in this next session to actually make a pledge?
Yeah, well, certainly I would encourage folks to ask the candidates that they're talking to if they are going to oppose tax increases, if they're going to cut taxes. And we promote the Taxpayer Protection Pledge as an option to have candidates put that promise in writing publicly. And we gather up, we track who signed the pledge in each state and each race, and we will publish that on our website and release a list of that as we head towards these primary dates, so folks can know who has signed the pledge, committing publicly to voters and constituents that they're going to oppose all tax hikes. And that makes a huge difference, rather than just somebody saying they're going to do something or not do something. And if you want any proof of it, look at Democrats we've seen now who have hiked taxes many times, like Governor Murphy in New Jersey and other places who are starting to say, oh, we're not going to increase taxes. We've been tracking Joe Biden's promise to not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year. Well, that's just a verbal promise. And despite the specificity of it, the president is continuously supporting policies that increase burdens on people who make less than $400,000 a year. So these verbal promises can go by the wayside. They can then be amended later. But when you have a clear promise in writing that says, I'm not going to support any tax increase, I'm a no vote on a tax increase, that takes tax hikes off the table and creates the environment where we can have reform that returns money to taxpayers rather than just shifting burdens around or finding a way to take some more money from somebody else. We want money returned to taxpayers when we see tax reform happen at the state level.
So people can learn more about ATR, Americans for Tax Reform, by going to your website, and you have probably people listed on there who have taken the pledge, I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We have I think it's 20 North Dakota folks in office from North Dakota have taken the pledge. That's 20, including Governor Burgum, Senator Kramer, Representative Armstrong. You can find that list of all the folks in the state legislature at atr.org, atr.org.
Excellent. We have it on the screen. Thank you, Doug, so much for giving us an update on what's going on with ATR. And we'll have you on again when we will talk about it, probably right about the time we start electing people so that we can hold their feet to the fire again.
Looking forward to it. And we're looking forward to North Dakota having a good legislative session next year where taxpayers get to see some of their money returned to them.
We are only hoping. We are really hoping. Thank you so much, Doug.